CME program. I am Dr. Vemuri Murthy, Chairman of the API Webinar CME Committee and Program Director. Before I proceed further, I request our API President, Dr. John Lagadda, if he has any remarks, before we start the program. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much again for all the members joining us today. And, I want to special thank Dr. Vemuri Murthy all the time because of his efforts to bring great speakers each time, the graph is going up, And second thing, I'm sure we're going to send an email soon to all the members that API initiating the new program called Community Health Education Program through media. API signed with GTV for 6 months. And every month, they're going to talk about one disease. For example, next month, November, is going to be lung cancer. So one of the lead speakers is going to talk about lung cancer through the GTV. And there is some question and answer sessions also there. And this is sponsor based. And I'm going to send all the details to all the members. And if anyone interested, please go ahead and talk to me, Ms. Vijay Kodali and Dr. Binod Sinha. Thank you again for joining again. I'm sure, this is one of the best things happening this year through API as a membership benefit, CME webinars. Thank you, Dr. Murthy again. Welcome, Dr. Paul, and good morning.
Thank you, Dr. John Lagadda. I also welcome our guests from India, including some of the medical students, residents, and faculty to this unique international program. Those of you who are not able to attend today, there is an opportunity for you to log on to the API website. And actually, today is a very remarkable day because we, as the first generation of physicians of Indian origin in the United States, we take pride in the advances that we have been watching very carefully for the past 10 years. The Indian medical education has made tremendous progress under the leadership of eminent people like our own speaker today, Dr. Vinod Pal. Global medical educational needs, standards, and curricula are undergoing rapid changes currently. It's just not in India, everywhere. The adoption of educational tools utilizing the newer technologies are evolving at a rapid pace. The availability of more future physician workforce and medical graduates is vital for providing adequate coverage during pandemic and non-pandemic times as well. The game-changing reforms in medical education in countries such as India are being advocated by the policies of the governments of the respective countries. They are shaped by factors such as the availability of adequate teaching faculty and, of course, resources. India, with hundreds of medical colleges, is addressing challenges of standardizing and providing high-quality education. So today's health topic, game-changing reforms in medical education in India, is a well-timed global health topic. We have a 45-minute presentation by the speaker, followed by a 15-minute question and answer session. I understand we have collected some questions already from our guests from India. Those of you who are eligible for the CME credit, please submit your pre and post surveys. Today's program moderator is an eminent neonatologist who doesn't need any special introduction to the API membership. Dr. Vidyasagar Dharmapuri is Emeritus Professor of Pediatrics at the University of Illinois, the Chicago College of Medicine, Chicago, Illinois. Thank you, Dr. Dharmapuri, for joining us today. It's now my pleasure and privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker from India, Professor Vinod K. Pal. He's a pediatrician by training and has been on the faculty of the Department of Pediatrics, All India Institute of Medical Sciences, New Delhi since 1985, and head of the department for nearly a decade. He's a globally recognized medical scientist and public health exponent. Government of India appointed Dr. Pal as a member of the National Institution for Transforming India, the NITI Aayog, in 2017, where he leads the health, nutrition, and HRD verticals. He has played a pivotal role in formulating the Ayushman Bharat initiative. Professor Paul was appointed as the chairman of the Board of Governors of Medical Council of India in 2018, where he is spearheading reforms in medical education. Dr. Paul is in the core team of the Union government for COVID-19 response. He heads the Empowered Group on Medical Infrastructure and COVID Management Plan. And he's also the co-chair of the Prime Minister of India's constituted task force on focused research on corona vaccine. Dr. Paul also heads the National Expert Group on Vaccine Administration for COVID-19. Professor Paul is a fellow of all the 3 science academies of the country and a recipient of the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar Centenary Award for Excellence in Biomedical Research and Public Health Champion Award. He was conferred with the prestigious Ishan Dogramasi Family Health Foundation Prize by the World Health Organization at the 2018 World Health Assembly. It's my pleasure to welcome and introduce Professor Vinod K. Paul. Dr. Paul. Please go ahead, sir.
Okay, just sharing my presentation. Okay. One. Can you see my presentation, Dr.
Yes,
Vemuri? Okay. Well, good morning, respected President Api, Dr. Dharmapuri Vidyasagar, my mentor, Dr. Vemuri Murthy for all the coordination. Good morning, Dr. Kodali, the leadership of API, distinguished participants of this CME session, the virtual CME session. I'm very pleased to be with you this morning and to share some thoughts and ideas and progress in medical education. Let me begin by complimenting our fraternity in the US, fraternity of scientists, eminent physicians, eminent surgeons, eminent pediatricians, and the wide spectrum of our esteemed colleagues who have made a great name and made great contribution to medical sciences, clinical practice, as well as research. I had the opportunity of being mentored by Dr. Vidyasagar in neonatology, late 90s, and also by Dr. Vinay Bhutani, as well as Dr. Siva Subramanian, the 3 teachers in the US who honed my skills in neonatology. I pay my very humble tribute to all the 3 teachers in my life.
It comes.
As rightly pointed out, Dr. Sudhakar, thank you for the opportunity, President Api. As pointed out, now I'm playing a role of a policy enabler at the Niti Aayog, which is the successor institution of the original Planning Commission of India. The Niti Aayog is chaired by the Honorable Prime Minister, and we are 4 members and 1 vice chairman, steering the think tank activities of the national government. And from that point of view, I had the opportunity to look at medical education holistically from the policy standpoint, but also had the opportunity to work as the chair of the board of governors, in addition to my normal portfolio at NITI, that superseded the Medical Council of India. So I'm pleased to share with you how the medical education scenario is emerging in India. India being a nation looking after 1/6 of humanity, what we do here has profound implications globally as well. And therefore, it is very apt for you to link it to global health. And the lessons that we learned and the path that we have taken has bearing on how other countries may like to address. And of course, we have a lot to learn from the US and of course, also from other countries. Uh, I would begin by posing the challenge, the most visible challenge, most remarkable challenge of availability of doctors in India. Our doctor population ratio currently is around 0.8 per thousand. We have a possible estimate of about a million doctors in 2017. Not very accurate, but this is the government's submission in the parliament. And so that's about 0.8 per million. There is a norm of 1 per thousand as a WHO norm that one aims for and would like to exceed. 1 per thousand itself is not really necessarily optimum, but even more important is the fact how the distribution of physicians and specialists happens in a country, because you can be all clustered in urban areas, and there are vast swaths of our nation and other nations where the doctor patient density is so low that even though the average looks good, the disaggregated distribution is poor. But just to make a starting point that we are low in terms of the overall availability of doctors. But if we add the Ayurveda and Unani and Siddha and homeopathy doctors, then we are adding another 7 to 8 lakh, 700 to 8,000 more, and then the ratio is 1.3. That brings into the question that this resource should be optimally utilized if it is not the case. On the other side of the slide, you see the ratio in other countries. The US is about 3, Europe is about 2.5, 2.8, and so on. So it shows you the comparison and also shows the uphill journey that we have in creating more doctors. So this is the first part, and we have tried to address this as I will demonstrate. I'm showing this slide to demonstrate to the fact that when you look at the availability of specialists, the situation is grim. These are the OECD countries, the strong economies of the world. And in the blue bar on the right side figure is the overall OECD average of specialists versus the generalist doctors as of today. You would note that what we are looking at is a density of 2.2 doctors, 2.2 specialist doctors per thousand, vis-a-vis 0.8 as generalist doctors per thousand. That means when you look at OECD countries, countries that are well developed, have strong health systems, specialty dominance is visible. And of course, family health is then taken as a specialty. So when you use the same yardstick for our country, then we are a reverse. Instead of a ratio of one specialist, one generalist for 4 specialists, we have 3 generalist doctors or GP doctors to 1 specialist. To me, this is the serious part of our challenge. How do we get the right number of specialists for our country? The country aspirations are not necessarily only for a general care. No, the country expects us to treat cancers, to treat heart conditions, to treat sick newborn babies, to do endoscopies when they are needed, and so on. And therefore, challenge within the challenge is actually the availability of specialists and just the numbers distribution apart. So we have this challenge that we have to keep in mind, even though one hopes, and I'm making a case here, that a ratio of 1:1,000 is within our grasp before the completion of the term of this government, but the specialist shortages would continue to be a challenge even for medium-term future. Here is the data, not necessarily perfect, because the sources of data on the availability of specialists, etc., are really not optimum, but here is the data as accurate as you would like it to be. If you look at the availability of anesthetists, obstetrician, pediatrician, radiologists, psychiatrists, general surgeons, We have put the ratio current availability in terms of current availability per 100,000 population. And there is a worldview availability or required numbers, required ratio in the next column. And then I have put forth here the current supply chain by way of diplomas, by way of degrees, by way of super specialties as applicable. The other part of the table had super specialties, not this one. Then also the supply from the National Board of Examination, which is the DNB and FNB, and we say supply chain in terms of an annual training of postgraduates. And you would notice that, for some of the specialties, it'll take us 30 years to reach the kind of ratio that is desirable. 13 years, 20 years, 25 years. Even when we are 100 years since our independence, we may still be just about enough with the current supply chain. It's a very worrying scenario. Not that we will allow this to happen, but that's the way things are right now. And this country is really anemic in terms of the specialists, in terms of overall availability of doctors. And I would hope that some of the people who are listening would actually come back. Young people should come back to India. There's so much to do. Overall, my overall estimate is that we have around 1/5 to 1/4 of availability of the specialists compared to what we need, 1/5. So whereas we would like to move from 0.8 to 1.0 or 1.5, hopefully that's a 2x issue. But here it is a 5x journey that we have to take. So within the doctor population that we have and what would come in, we have to have a large number of them, if not almost all of them, to be trained as specialists. And as I said, there are two streams of training doctors in India. Let me explain that. So we have the system of medical colleges, where we train as MBBS, MD, MS, DM, MCH degrees. These are formal medical colleges. They are campuses. Some of them are private, and I'll come to those numbers in a minute. So that's one way of training the postgraduates, but this is also the only way of training the MBBS doctors in the country. We, of course, have a small number relatively being trained in other countries, China and Central Asia, who take undergraduate degree in these countries and then come back to India and have great difficulty in passing the exams and so on. Nonetheless, MBBS and moving on to specialists, the mainstream system is the medical colleges system, which comes under the rubric of the previous erstwhile Medical Council of India, now the National Medical Commission. So that's the system for MBBS as well as for postgraduate. But for postgraduate training, we actually have another fascinating system. And that system is anchored by the National Board of Examinations, NBE, which imparts specialist degrees that are called the Diplomate of the National Board. These are typically 3 years, but there are also 2 years DNB program in some of the courses. And then you have a fellowship of the National Board, which is FNB, which is typically 1 or 2 years. So we have a postgraduate training system or capacity system which works through the National Board of Examinations. And here it works on the apprenticeship model, that you are in a normal hospital, a private or a government hospital, and the consultants there are teachers for you. You get trained under them as a resident, you appear in examination, somebody is watching your training of cook training quality, and then you get this degree. And for almost all practical purposes, the DNB is equivalent to MD, and a specialist degree DNB is equal to the DM or the MCH. That's a very important aspect I would like people to know if it is not so well known, I guess. Great stream. So here we are. We have typically, participation here is largely private hospitals. If you see the box on the right side, of the 704 institutions that are part of the NBE system, 76% are private hospitals. So the large private hospitals are partnering this. They are not medical colleges. Some of them are, but largely they are not. Almost all of them are really not. Then you have district hospitals, 64 of them, and then you have the government and the PSUs. PSUs are public sector organizations like the railways and army and so on, defense hospitals. So a large participation of training from the private hospitals via this arrangement comes for postgraduate training through the private hospitals, and there's a huge potential out there. I'll be using this terminology, so I thought let me clear it. And in terms of number of seats also, the rough proportion between private and the other three is roughly the same, as you can see. All right, now I move toward how things have panned out in the last 6 to 10 years. And here is what I would like to start with. First and foremost, the most remarkable reform that has happened is just about rolling out, just about set in motion. On September the 25th, almost exactly 5 weeks ago, a new system of medical education regulation and facilitation and nurture has come into being. This system has replaced the erstwhile Medical Council of India with the National Medical Commission. The Medical Council of India existence goes back to early 50s under the Indian Medical Council Act. That act has been repealed, and a new act that was passed in August 2019 by both houses of parliament is now in operation from 25th September 2020, 5 weeks ago, and this is the new arrangement. So we, as the Board of Governors, passed on the task and the responsibility and the statute to this new organization. So that is the big game changer. In a way, it is progressive. It is not based, unlike the Medical Council of India, on vote dynamics and elections by physicians and professional bodies, which created several problems. And now it is a commission. It is, I'll show you the composition. It has 4 boards. These are semi-autonomous boards within the National Medical Commission system. A board that deals with undergraduate education, another one for postgraduate education. Then one very critical board deals with medical assessment, looking at facilities, looking at norms and standards and accreditation. And the last one is for the purpose of ethics and graduate and postgraduate registration. It has a president, it has 2 full-time members and so on. This is the core arrangement within the National Medical Commission. If you notice here, this is a 33-member body. 22 members are part-time. 10 of them come from the vice chancellors of the state universities on health sciences from the country. In the larger body, which is the advisory body, has 1 vice chancellor from each state or union territory. It has 1 representative of medical, the medical councils of the state. Out of them, 10 vice chancellors and 9 representatives of medical councils are chosen to be in the commission, which is the executive body. There are 3 members from law, medical ethics, and science, technology, economics, and then there are ex officio members, which includes a director of one of the All India Institutes of Medical Sciences and centers of other institutions of eminence. Don't have to go, but to tell you the character of this commission is very academic. Now it is rooted in academia. It has eminent people. It has people in the previous slide that I showed. The president and the whole time members are nominated by the government of India, by the Prime Minister's office, Cabinet of India. Right, so that's one big reform. This is the beginning of doing the business of medical education in a different way. And that is set in motion already. And we have Professor S.C. Sharma, my colleague at AIIMS, who retired some time ago, is the chairperson of the National Medical Commission. But I want to allude to a very major reform that took place about 4 or 5 years ago. And this is the entrance test for undergraduate and postgraduate programs of the country. The test is called the National Eligibility Entrance Test, NEET UG, is in operation since 2016, and NEET PG from 2017. It is conducted by the UG is conducted by the NCERT, which is the National Council for Education, Research and Training. It has about 1 million entrants and spread all over the country. Postgraduate entrance test is conducted by the national board through a national testing agency, and typically has 150,000 plus candidates each year, and a relatively less number of centers, but spread all over. And the counseling is conducted by the DGH, the Director General of Health Services, by the government. The moot point here is that after the NEET has come into being, every medical graduate or a postgraduate candidate has to come through the system. So it has weeded out corruption in giving admissions in the country. Largely, it was a free for all in the private institutions, capitation fees and auctioning of the seats, etc. Now we'll come to that part, but now no student can be just picked up unless the person has gone through NEET and has a standing in the merit list of the NEET. So this is a huge reform, I would say, a mega reform, which is working pretty well at this point in time. And it has helped in cleaning up the system in a very significant way. It is fair, and it is something that the students love, the faculty love. So that's the reform I would like to bring to your kind attention. Now, this is just to say that now I move into how what we did, or in the recent times, how things panned out. So this is my locus standi, specifically chairing the Board of Governors. This was an entity which superseded the Medical Council of India, the elected Medical Council of India by law, by the President of India. So that arrangement was put away. So the Board of Governors took over. We were operating under the Indian Medical Council Act, but only as the nominated body. We were 11 people, and it has Director AIMS and Director Indian Council of Medical Research, and very eminent Director PGI, very eminent people, Director NIMHANS, and so on. So it's a small group of people who ran the show for a period of 2 years between the erstwhile elected MCI and the National Medical Council. We were like the bridge. But yes, it was an opportunity that we tried to use, a God-given opportunity, grateful to the Almighty for giving us this role. We ran the system for 2 years, and we carried out as many as 55, almost 60 amendments to the regulations, just to show that we were prolific in this period of time. Now, our aim was very clear. Our priorities and goals were very clear. One is that we must build a stronger undergraduate and postgraduate capacity. I gave you the reason for it. And second, transform the regulatory system to the best possible extent. Actually, when we started, we didn't know we are there for 3 months or 6 months, and we ended up being there for 2 years. And transform credibility, which is also part of the reform process, and the image and the accountability part for any organization. So here we are. In this period, you can see we came in 2018-19, 21 new medical colleges, 2017 government, 4 private. Next year, it jumps. It's one single year. This is a record. One single year, 38 medical colleges, and of course, overwhelmingly government. So actually the skew went in the direction of government medical colleges. Some previous times, it was mostly private medical colleges being added. So that's a record. It happened. So you can make change. A country can witness change, a rapid change. And I'll amplify this here now. Here is how the story over decades looks like. This actually is a cartoon from the Times of India, but very helpful. Pre-independence, there were 20 medical colleges. Then 41 were added up to 1960. And then another 40 were added in the next decade. Another 11 are added between 71 and 80s when I was studying. 81 to 1933, but now you can see that the red part is big. Okay, the private medical colleges addition happened from 80s onwards in a big way. The government, the blue part was small. But from 2011 to 19, you can see that the government's initiatives had also taken a big push, and we were part of this journey. And I'm going to come to this issue. This is a newspaper item of the same, where this graph was. We added the biggest ever number of MBBS seats. I'm coming to that in a minute. But this is the same story of how the new medical colleges were added. And you can see that the recent decade has added a huge number, medical colleges. Since 2014, the government, NDA government, government of Prime Minister Modi has added 158 medical colleges. Today, the number is 539, and 158 were added since 2014. So shows you how the acceleration is taking place in the country. But even more important is what more is going to come. And this is the government's effort. From 2014, 58 medical colleges, phase 1, 24 more, phase 3, after the Prime Minister went for the second term, 75 more have been planned. So there are plans since 2014 to add 157 new medical colleges, out of which 43 are functional, or maybe a little more now, maybe 2-3 more, and about 114 have to come up by 2023, and that would take the number of government medical colleges, hugely higher than what we have. So we are building capacity in a very big way. Of course, you can say what the standards are. Yes, we can discuss about them. There are constraints, and I'm going to share some of those concerns. But the fact remains that there is a push for capacity. If you don't have capacity, where are the doctors? How do we train the specialists? It has to be there. And therefore, a big push has been given. We are also very proud to let you know the progress on, in addition, creation of the new All India Institutes of Medical Sciences. My AIIMS came up in 1956, and this was the only one till about 7 years ago, when 6 more came up and become functional. But we are now adding another 8, which are in the phase of early start of MBBS classes. It's not fully complete, but they are in operation. They are added to the MBBS training pool. And then, of course, there are some that will be made functional this year, and the remaining 3 will come up next year or so. These pictures represent the the pictures represents the 6 All India Institutes of Medical Sciences, which are the first cohort after my AIIMS. These are at Raipur, Rishikesh, Jodhpur, Bhubaneswar, Bhopal, fully functional. They have faculty issues, but they are basically functioning as MBBS program, as well as postgraduates, as well as super specialty programs. So they're working rather well. They are still not fully, reached their potential, but that's, this is not new, but we are very satisfied with their progress. So these are 21 additional institutions that have been created in the last 7 to 10 years. If you see the left side graph is how the medical colleges are looking just about this time. And once the scheme for those 152 medical colleges will be complete before 2024, the picture would look more dense for the country. And you can also see that the regional distribution looks better, not optimum, not ideal, but looks better. So that is the endeavor toward which the union government is working. I now bring to your attention the capacity. So here is the capacity for undergraduate seats. Between 2018 and 19, that's a year that we were holding hands, the country added 32% seats in one go. 33% seats. You can see how the progress in the past was. You can see those numbers moving from about 52,000 to about 60,000 over 3 to 4 years. And then in 1 year, almost 20,000 seats were added. And today we have 80,000 undergraduate seats, 80,000. And in 2014, we were about 54. And then, of course, you go back 7-10 years, we were 32,000. We have to have places where you train doctors. And from 2014, there is 48% increase, 1.5 times. And this is a record by itself, this single year increase or a 6 years increase, whichever way you look at it. It is a record. It is remarkable. Here is the report card on the MD/MS seats in the medical college system. I'll come to the national board seats in a minute. And you can see again, every year we were adding 500 seats in the MCI era and 538 seats, 800 seats. And then in the 2 years that we worked, we had the opportunity to regulate for 3 years because the last one was also done before we laid down the office. And you can see 3 times, more than 3 times increment in postgraduate seats. So the pipeline is now looking stronger. I'll come to the exact number of postgraduate seats, but in the medical college system, the seats are now about 39,000. To which we will add the DNB FNB seats. And look at this parallel system. This is the country has this second system, as I said, and working in parallel, the national board has been also increasing the number of seats from about less than 5,000 in 2014. We are now close to 9,000. And this year, I think it will be 10 to 11,000. So this is again a remarkable strengthening of the pipeline. This is a postgraduate pipeline. I explained to you that this is a parallel system working through largely private hospitals, just the hospital. So if you add this up, here is the report card since 2014. Addition, 1.5 times the number of medical colleges. And this is up to 2020. Okay, the latest bunch is delayed a little bit because of COVID. So this is 1.5 times the number of medical colleges, the functional medical colleges. Undergraduate seats, 1.5 times, 48% increase. And postgraduate increase seats by 80% increase, 180%. That's where we are. Moving from about 24,000 seats to 54,000 seats, about 40,000, 42,000 coming from the medical college system and the rest coming from the National Board of Examination system, adding diplomas and everything. So this is one, the major effort that has been implemented. Remarkable change. So this will go a long way in fulfilling the capacity. Now I move to my second segment. And here looking at reforms other than capacity. These are regulatory reforms. And here is the one which actually was initiated by our predecessors, a new competency-based curriculum. The last curriculum was way back in mid-90s. A new curriculum was being developed by my predecessor system, but we were happy to implement this when we took over. This is a competency-based curriculum which has wonderful new additions, the world-class ideas such as early clinical and community exposure, a very clear program on attitudes and ethics, a foundation course for 1 month after you join. For 1 month, you don't go to the dissection hall. You do yoga, you go sports, and you look at history of medicine, and you go to community, you visit the hospital, you learn to meet each other, you improve your IT skills, and you improve your language, and so on. So this has been one major reform of the competency-based curriculum. There is a vertical integration and horizontal integration. So it's a very contemporary curriculum, and we were happy to implement this effectively. This is being appreciated in the country in a very big way. The second reform is here. that the BOG has made it mandatory that all medical colleges shall have an emergency medicine department by the year 2025, the year of the 75th anniversary of India's independence. You'll be surprised to note that medical colleges have a casualty, which is run by one person from medicine, one person from surgery, pediatrics. The emergency departments out of these 500 odd medical colleges exist only in 35 of them. And emergency medicine is only 35 odd seats in the entire country. So we want to change this because the emergency is the face of the hospital for the sickest and the injured. And this will be transformative because by law, we passed this regulation, and by law, all medical colleges will now have to have a freestanding emergency medicine department with dedicated faculty, and then that paves way for also post-graduation in emergency medicine. So we believe this will go a long way in saving lives and strengthening the training. The third reform, which I'm very proud of, and it's all gazetted already, you can see it, is a win-win idea. From this year onwards, all the postgraduates who would join in their second year will have to rotate for a period of 3 months in a district hospital, in a district system. So a pediatrician under training in the third or the fourth or the fifth semester will have to go to a district hospital, work there as a part of the team in the outpatient, in the newborn unit there, under the guidance of the local specialists. This is how it will be implemented. Now it has 3 reasons, particularly 2 reasons, and the third one is also relevant. The first, it improves the training of the future specialists. Now this is for the specialists. All 40,000 people will now go for 3 months. It improves the training because I then know the priority problems that a district health system, which is closer to the people, faces. I learn to work with limited resources. I learn to work and respect the teams at the district level. And I get firsthand experience to conduct surgeries in that place. And the second part is you serve the hospital. You are additional junior residents. You are under trainee specialists. You assist. So you improve the services there. Day in and night, you do duties. You operate. Or if you are community medicine trainee, then you go into the field and help in doing certain kind of work. So you serve. And it is our estimate that every district hospital of our country will have 6 to 8 additional doctors available to them in the country. Imagine what it means. Every district hospital, 725 of them. And if you extend it to sub-district, because this scheme also applies to any 100-bedded hospital in the government system, 1,100 or 1,500 hospitals will have 6 to 8 to 10 additional hands all the time through this rotation. And that is a huge strengthening of the district system where house job level people are available. And the third small benefit, which we didn't realize would happen, would be when I take away these 25% of the batch to go for this posting, I can create 25% more seats in the medical college. So by doing so, one can hope to add after 3 to 4 years, 15,000 more postgraduate seats, because my college is now having less number of PGs for running the hospital as well as for training. So these are the 3 benefits. We're very proud of this. This has been appreciated by the Honorable Prime Minister, appreciated by the Central Council for Health and Welfare, which has all the health ministers of the states of India. We think this is a very, very remarkable reform. And it is in operation now. Today's batch, the new batch that is joining anytime soon, will be going for this posting next year. Here is some ideas for you to set up hospitals. Till now, only a government entity or a pure private entity could set up a medical college. We have now said on the left side, 3 or more, 4 private entities can come together and run a hospital. This was not there, so make it happen. It looks very logical, but it wasn't there. So somebody can build a hospital. I'm good at making hospitals, so I join hands. Somebody can make a college, and maybe an engineering college is not working. You convert that into college, medical college building with labs and lecture theater. And somebody can do housing, hostels, and so on. Three of you can join, and you can run a medical college. You bring in expertise of your respective areas. You bring in capital. And the first one in this, under this rubric is coming from Tata's and the Manipal Group in Jamshedpur. We're very proud that this new arrangement has been instituted by us and is in operation. Likewise, a postgraduate program, a district hospital can join hands with college, co-located college. Let's say a college in Kanpur and a district hospital in Kanpur can join hands and run a combined program where you take more postgraduates for training because you're using resources that are shared. So these inventions were done and are now part of the regulation. We have also started for the first time in India, laboratory medicine postgraduate program. It wasn't there, it was all fragmented. So now we have formal lab medicine PG program in the offering. We started an online research methodology compulsory course for all postgraduates and all teachers. Every year, 40,000, 38,000 postgraduates, 38,000 theses, but they are of zero quality. And we don't have this capacity among the teachers of India, medical teachers of India, how to do research except for a very few people. So we have made it compulsory that this online course developed by the Indian Council of Medical Research will have to be gone through and get certified before a postgraduate can pass, is allowed to sit in the exam, so that they know the basics of how the research is to be conducted, clinical research, association, basic statistics, and so on. And also, we have made it compulsory for teachers to be done in the next by 2022. For all teachers, this is now compulsory to go through this because the teachers will not get their promotion after 2022, and the PGs, of course, will not get their degree. So we think it is transformative in terms of our ability to think and look at literature and also to be able to conduct simple studies. And then, of course, you can augment your skills. This is compulsory by law now. I also address quickly how the teacher shortages have been instituted. So we have said visiting faculty, which was not allowed in the last 20 years, earlier it was allowed, can be allowed in medical colleges to the tune of 30% of the overall full-time faculty. We think it is a quality improvement. It is a top up on the regular staff. We don't believe that the part-time people can run medical colleges. No. Over and above the full-time contingent, we have now said visiting faculty can come in and teach on a regular basis. These could be retired people, people in the private practice, people from the army, doctors, and so on. So this is in operations. And this improves the quality of teaching and the range of teaching in a significant way. We have also allowed non-teaching specialists in district hospitals to be able to act as teachers if a medical college is started in that college, in the district hospitals. We have also, there was some infirmity about DNB PGs to become teachers. There was strong additionalities to be done. We have simplified that DNB postgraduates can become medical teachers. So a new pipeline of the DNB training, which I talked about, is now opened up for becoming more readily the teachers. Here is teachers promotion criteria, quality part. As I said, it is now essential for them to do the basic research methods course before they get their first promotion. It is also essential for them to do a medical education course. We have said that the publications criteria will be only in the 5 index systems that we have prescribed. It is PubMed and Embase and so on. This is prescribed by the Journals Guild, Medical Journals Guild of India. You will not publish elsewhere. The Copernicus will not count. So it's all weeded out completely. And those who have funded projects need not have a publication from step 1 to step 2 promotion. So we have tried to bring in quality. We have also said that you can be the second author or a corresponding author, because the teachers for their promotion in the last 7-8 years were stealing the work and the credit of the students. So we have rationalized this. For foreign graduates trained in other countries, China and Russia and so on. We have improved their, when they come back, they typically fail. 15% pass the screening test that is conducted. And in order to give some cushion to learn the skills, a program has been started, which has been operation. And we are also custodian of the ethics in medical profession. And we have created new SOPs on the indiscretions done by our professionals, the doctors, and if they have to be punished, their licenses have to be tweaked or suspended. This was very ad hoc, so we cleaned it up, and we have a very structured SOP to take action on the errant medical professionals within the Act. I'm now happy to state other reforms. These are a path-breaking reform is that now, for the first time, India has a legal framework to practice telemedicine. Believe me, it was not there. And even now in several countries, there is no legal way of doing. So we worked on what we call as telemedicine practice guideline under the Act that it is promulgated. And it's a coincidence that this was we were working on this for about 6 months prior to the lockdown. And the day the lockdown was announced, we took the Prime Minister's permission and launched it. So it came so handy in COVID times. It was just meant, as if it was meant for this eventuality. So the telemedicine on phone through video is now legally valid. Before this, there were High Court observations in Maharashtra and others where actually it was not fully legal and nobody knew what the liabilities are. Today, the doctors and patients can trust a legal consultation within the guidelines that are available. It has unleashed, of course, it was so handy in COVID period, millions of consultations took place. If it wasn't there, maybe the consultation could have happened, but would not necessarily been covered by any law in terms of any trust issues and so on. So the tele platforms have started to come up. The one that is on the right side on top, written Hindi, is a platform which the government created after March, which is called e-Sanjeevani system, through which consultation. So I'm only saying that a revolution in telemedicine has been set in motion by this decision, which the BOG took, and my team at NITI, in my other hat, wearing my other hat, developed this by consultation. So this is remarkable. I cannot go through how this works, but there is an algorithm which looks at the consent issue, which then you decide which mode you want to do. If it is an emergency, the algorithm says no, go to face-to-face. I cannot advise you. If it is not an emergency, then you go through the more information from the individual on audio or a video system, and you decide whether she needs health education or counseling or medicine. And then we have created lists of medicine that can be given. First time it is something else. If the patient, you are seeing a patient already been seen, it's a different list. Someday we can describe this in more detail. We have also made a provision that a facilitated consultation can take place in a primary care setting, the health and wellness centers, where a nurse will help a patient take a consultation from the other side by a doctor, so that those things are covered. These are available online in public domain to see. I'm also happy to say another big issue in medical education has been, it is very costly to set up a medical college. It needs 300 crores. You ask for so many acres of land. Why is it that needed today, 5 acres or 10 acres? So the minimum standards paradigm of the medical education has been a stumbling block in creating new medical colleges. So what happens is that there is no place in a city, within the city, where the patients are. So you set up a medical college 20 kilometers on the outskirts, 15 kilometers, but there are no patients there. Students don't like to be there. So we have now developed the new revision of the medical standards, and it is now for NMC to take over. But from our side, this has been done and submitted to the government. In fact, this has been now put in the public domain. It's already in operation, and that operationalization happened 2 weeks ago by the National Medical Commission. So it is a reform in continuum. just to show you that we said there is no space requirement from our side for any hospital. You set up hospital according to the laws that prevail locally, and you set up a medical college, but this much teaching space should be there. So we only specified how much teaching space is required, and it can come in 1 tower or 10 towers, whichever way it happened by the local laws. So we have a paradigm shift now, and you can see that even the teaching areas, we need less teaching areas. We have rationalized the area, so it will bring down the cost in a very significant way in setting up medical without compromising quality. Without compromising quality, that is taken care of. But the redundancies have been removed, and acreage is replaced by the space that you need. And then how you create, you can go 8 floors in a metro, but you cannot go more than 2 in a hill station. So that is determined by the local laws. The next reform is the next. This is the mandate of the National Medical Commission, but our system has made this. We have approved what we think is the model, and it is for the National Medical Commission. We have handed over as a legacy. And here, you remember I talked about the entrance exam for undergraduates and postgraduates. Now, this is the exit exam for the MBBS graduates. It's a big reform, because this exam will be used to pass MBBS, and therefore you register as an Indian medical graduate. You are also eligible then to do post-graduation. And the scores that you obtain here are used for developing the merit list for postgraduate seats. So that this will replace the PG NEET in due course, as well as the one uniform exam for the entire nation for MBBS. This will take care of the uneven quality in the country. And what we are proposing is some good lessons learned from the American system. This will be a 2-step exam, one at the end of 4.5 years, which is a 6-subject MCQ-based theory exam. Then you go through internship, and then after internship, you go through practical exam. By the way, it also takes care of the internship problem that we now face. Today, believe me, it is so sad that during internship, which was such a lovely period in our training, is used only for coaching, only to go to the coaching centers and to mug up so that you could appear for postgraduate entrance exam after internship. We ruined the beauty of immersion during internship. So we will protect this, because the practical exam will happen after internship, and the step 1, step 2 would be added. More of this is for the NMC to take forward, but from our side, this is done. And likewise, a very remarkable part of the National Medical Commission's mandate is that they will fix the fees for half the seats in medical colleges. And they'll also have a formula for all the seats. So actually, when you fix this, you also, in a way, influence the remaining 50%. So the fee regulation is now part of the National Medical Commission. It was not part of Medical Council. It was being done by the states by having specific committees on which High Court judges were sitting. So this is a paradigm shift. And for this also, our BOG has created the guidelines, a comprehensive document. We worked for 5 months on this one. And this is a legacy document passed on to the NMC for implementation from next year onwards. So this job done. They can modify it, but it has been done as a work. So for come next year, the fee mess will be taken care of. And this is a mega reform waiting to happen, and for which the path has been paved by the BOG. Moving quickly to the last segment, we worked on ease of business, transparency, accountability. We didn't believe in being, the great, regulator. And here is the test. The Medical Council of India has been very huge predilection for litigation. And in 1 year, you can see that there was a 76% decrease in litigation in Supreme Court related to Medical Council. 76% decrease. I still think this is still too much, but our decisions were accepted by people, and above all, they were validated by these. So huge accountability. Very quickly, before I wrap up, I also mentioned that the National Board of Examination, which is a system we were not driving, but as Neeti, I'm happy to support them, has now started diploma courses in district hospitals for state MBBS doctors in 8 disciplines. The diplomas had disappeared and we have brought it back. 10,000 diploma seats are being created through the National Board of Examination system. So in addition to DNB, FENB courses, there'll be now diplomas as a third species within the NBE system. This will unleash 10,000 PG diploma seats. They have also allowed in-service candidates reservation. So I can be nominated by Punjab to do neurosurgery in Apollo Hospital in Mumbai, let's say, or Chennai. That provision has been made, and they have also started DNB in family medicine in district hospital. Big reforms from that institution. Where are we? Well, we still believe that huge potential on the NBE system, because National Board system is covering 6 lakh beds. 50% of all beds are in the private sector. And from there, you are getting 7,500 PG seats. From the other system, you are getting 40,000 seats. So there is a huge potential through the National Board of Education system for using the existing private medical colleges, the PSU, the municipality systems, for a huge upsurge in specialty training, the specialist training, and that's part of the solution of the huge deficit that we have. This is waiting to be harnessed. Do you remember? There are only 700 hospitals which are part of NBE, but there are 31,000 hospitals, and at least half of them can be part, and imagine how many seats it will unleash. We did hunting for DNB seats from armed forces system, railways, ESI, employees system. We spotted that without doing anything extra, without any new specialist and new bed being added, 1,500 seats DNB system can be created, and we asked them to apply. They applied for about 400, more will come. So there are these hidden places for training which we have to harness, particularly through the National Board. Here we are then, eventually, we will achieve our doctor population ratio of 1 per 1,000 by 2024. This also will fulfill the promise of the government to double the capacity from 2014 by the year 2024. UG seats will look like more than 100,000 by 2024. This is already on track. We can now then go for 2023 goals, which can be easily 1.5. That's possible. It will take us closer to better ratios. China is 1.4 today. We also wish to empower nurse practitioners, mid-level providers. We want to use the Ayush workforce better, and we think by that time we will have enough if we can ensure distribution to take care of India's health system. And likewise, I'm visualizing 100,000 postgraduate seats between medical colleges and National Board by the year 2024. Starting, as I said, we have now about 54,000 between NBE and medical colleges, and 2014 was about, so we are almost, we're going to be there 100. And then for each UG, there'll be 0.8 PG seats, almost equal the way it should be, and it is in the US, even a different ratio. So this will correct the postgraduate training. In the end, these are the key points that I have submitted to you this morning. Firstly, we believe the nation is undergoing massive regulatory reforms in medical education, reforms in a big way. Medical education capacity has been ramped up as never before. I tried to make that case. We believe National Medical Commission, which is a change of a lifetime, will be a great enabler for the next generation medical education paradigm. And this also, by the way, reflects the political will to transform the sector. Of course, challenges remain. I alluded to them. I don't like the 5X challenge for specialists. Please help us if you can. We believe NBE system provides for us to be able to harness that 600,000 beds in the private sector for training. Every bed of this nation should not only for service, but also for education and training of nurses and doctors and paramedics. But we have a huge problem of teacher shortages. It's difficult to get faculty. we are still grappling with this. With these words, my profound gratitude for the opportunity and regard that you have given. Api, Dr. Sudhakar, thank you so very much for your gesture. I'm honored to have spoken to you this morning. And thank you, Dr. Vidyasagar, for being the connect and my mentor and for being the chairperson for this talk this morning.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for a great presentation. We are very proud to learn about this emerging centralized high-quality medical education initiative for the entire country. We really commend your ongoing contributions. Now, I take the liberty of requesting you, subject to your time constraints, to give us another 15 minutes for the questions and answer session, because there are so many wonderful comments and, of course, commendations, for your great presentation. I don't know about your time schedule, and I know we exceeded 1 hour of CME, but it doesn't matter to us. And I think to have you on this platform today with us itself is a great landmark for us, for the organization. So is it okay to have Dr.
Please go ahead.
Vidyasagar to proceed with
Yes.
10 to
Can
15?
you hear me?
Sorry, it took longer than I was.
No, that's wonderful. Can you hear me, please?
Yeah,
Yes,
Dr. Vidyasagar, please.
Okay. First of all, I should say thank you, Dr. Paul. Excellent presentation. I should add to the earlier comments. Dr. Paul is a brilliant man, brilliant and highly knowledgeable person, and he's very much dedicated to the country. And his work and his presentation shows all of you that what kind of information he has and how he has looked at the medical education from a total perspective of India, not just in the classroom education. So his vision is wide, knowledge is very excellent, and thinking is excellent. So first of all, I thank Vinod for your participation and trying to bring so many innovative changes. In a way, it's a revolutionizing medical education in India. We had a very good education, and I should add one sentence that we all members of API have been the beneficiary of medical education in India for last half a century. We recent graduates, so on and so forth. I joined medical school 1956. So you can imagine even that education has helped us quite a bit to establish ourselves in this modern society here, and we have contributed to our mission. Coming to your talk, there are so many important and interesting suggestions and implementations you have made in terms of education. One thing that stands out in my mind as a teacher, and you too as a teacher, is the last subject item you mentioned, extreme shortage of teachers, especially the postgraduate education. On the one hand, we have shortage of postgraduates, and on the other hand, we need a lot more postgraduate teachers in order to teach them. So we did understand, we did hear some of the ideas that you incorporated, how you want to supplement education. But how long do you think it will take for you or India to have sufficient number of teachers, particularly for the development of postgraduate education? You are talking about various specialties. Establishing emergency medicine requires a new concepts and new teachers who are very well versed in that one. And also, I want to add one thing is the number of comments coming. I've been reading in the chat here. Everybody gives very high marks and very for your excellent talk, and they are looking very eagerly to see how they can participate in this mega plan you have. Is there any role or a possibility for physicians or API physicians can contribute in teaching, in participating in your excellent program you have developed? Would you like to answer that one?
Okay. Can I take one or two more questions? So
Yes.
then I can
Okay.
answer,
Well-
saving time, more precise, sir. Is that
Yeah,
okay?
I have
Well,
one.
I'm seeing here what my chat if there are any more education, I have really put together, lumped together. See,
Okay.
Vijay,
for example, I would like to see more questions coming into my
yeah,
chat.
I can help you, sir. Dr. One of them is mandatory family medicine, sir. VK Paul, sir. Mandatory family medicine. NMC law prescribes the family medicine that can give itself like you're. So, I mean, bottom of the heart, so thank you for emergency medicine. That's right in the annals, excellent, sir. Same thing, family medicine, which is essential for all Western. That's one question, sir. Number two, 30,000 private hospitals. And there's so many physicians. America, 50 medical colleges have no hospitals. Sir. In America, 50 medical colleges have no hospitals. And they all go to the private hospital. Like, for example, a medical college students or PGs can go to the nearby NABH hospital and come back to the education together. That model, sir, you might be looking into. That's one question we have, sir. Another question is WFME, World Federation Medical Education Accreditation, ECFMG, that's one issue. ECFMG raises, sir, I'm sure that's the third question. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Can I come in, Dr. Sagar?
Yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. So firstly, yes, teacher shortages are huge, but they are more for the MBBS system, medical college system. Because if you look at the National Board of Examination training, then that's why I find that to be very aspirational, because there private hospitals have specialists and they become teachers. There is nothing very difficult. 8 years into profession and you are senior teacher, and 5 years into profession you are junior teacher. So actually the real challenge there is to open that pipeline, ask these private hospitals to embrace National Board of Examination DNB students, which they don't do. So a typical hospital, say Max Hospital, 200 bedded. If you look at the architecture and number of beds and people, they may be in a position to take 40 DNB students each year, but they won't do 40, they will do 10. Because for pediatrics, let's say, if they can do let's say do 6 every year, they will only do 2, because 2 residents serve their purpose in terms of service. And they don't want to take 4 additional for the sake of education, because they think it's a drain on their resources. So it's a mindset problem, and also a little bit of sacrificing the revenue issue, but then you also improve the quality. So the challenge for postgraduate training, one part can be handled by National Board embracement by the private players, and that's something that we are working on. The bigger challenges in the medical colleges and to get faculty in anatomy and physiology and forensic medicine, even pharmacology, as also in super specialties, is a huge problem. And we want to open pathways for that. And that actually, unfortunately, is a full-time job for the core faculty. And it is a core faculty number that is difficult to match. So the governments are shuffling teachers from a medical college to the other to balance, and the private person is taking them part-time, shows them as full-time. So we really have to have more people interested in this. We need to be more liberal with the payment packages and so on. One of the steps that we have taken is that the retired faculty, medical teachers who are coming from the armed forces medical system, about 200 of them every year, are recognized medical teachers from the AFMS system. We want to get them into the faculty. So we're looking at innovative ways of doing it. Unfortunately, for the medical college side, because you have to be full-time, unless you shift and young people come back to India, that will not really work. But on the national board side, you can help, because you can provide mentorship to these students in the private hospitals or the PSU hospitals, because by themselves, the level of training that the local consultants will impart may not necessarily be of great quality, because when you're looking at all kinds of medical colleges. So there, I think having MOUs, spending time as a capsule, and like Dr. Sagar, you would know that Gangaram Hospital has DNB neonatology. So surely, apart from their normal way, time can be spent, DNB students can be made intelligent, and then Delhi DNB students can come around and be taught by Dr. Vijay Sagar. He can teach at the same time 40 of them from various hospitals of Delhi. So there are ways in which it can work. The point with regard to using private hospitals as a part of medical college, we have been toying with this. We thought this, like to see it happening, but what happens is that you see the contingent of MBBS students have to be mentored on a stable basis by the hospital, which forms a medical college hospital. So they can go where they can, but you need teachers on that side to be able to train. And that again becomes an issue. And therefore, we currently think that you need a freestanding medical college. As I said, it can be part of the consortium. The medical college is being run by entity A, has an agreement with a private hospital. But then that hospital has to run like a teaching. We can discuss more details. We have not been able to crack it to an extent.
One other question they're talking about, many of our members is
Please.
using a telemedicine concept. Can members of API qualified and
Yes,
interested in
very
teaching?
much so. They're very much so. I think that's eminently possible because telemedicine has been used in recent times as the only way of students getting training because they cannot come to the colleges even now. Colleges are not functioning face to face. Yes, telemedicine can be a definite way through which you can support the medical education, both of postgraduates as well as of undergraduate, as well as of nurses, as well as of super specialists. Indeed.
Very good.
Family
That's a
medicine.
very
Family
encouraging thing, but perhaps our president and Dr. Murthy can take it into action.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Sir, the
I
question
think
family
we've got.
medicine.
I think we have time for a couple of more questions. Because of the intensity and importance of the topic, and I know there are a lot of questions still hanging in there. I think we can have a couple of more questions. The one question I have for you, just one question from me, is there any age restriction for visiting faculty?
70 years. Yeah.
So, Dr. Lokesh Yudra, you
Yes,
have the
yes.
final question,
Yes,
please.
sir. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul, sir. The students currently 2017, the next exam is brilliant, excellent with thanks so much. But same thing, computerized multiple choice questions from first year onwards. So like Rishikesh Ames, which is excellent, sir. So can NMC consider starting internals and final MBBS like anatomy to medicine, like university exams, 100% computerized questions? That's what we did the survey, 70% of them already. We're going nationwide, 10 to 20,000 survey coming on, and we're going to publish within 3-4 weeks, sir.
Yeah, it is possible. We're beginning with the next as a computerized examination. So if the end exam becomes like this, downstream examination will have to be aligned, and that's easy.
Sure.
That will follow, and yes, that would happen as well for the internal examinations. Yes, indeed. Because
Another thing is,
I want. Sorry, please, sir.
the family medicine also after you've done that one's also like.
Well, family medicine is it's very sad. Again, one thing that still could not be sorted out. Family medicine as a postgraduate degree exists in India for at least 10 to 15 years. But you'll be surprised that there are only 3 medical colleges which have chosen to do family medicine, 3. And there are only 12 postgraduate students or 15 out of the 38,000 seats that are opting for family medicine. The reason is, where is the demand?
Mandatory, sir. If you make mandatory, it will happen, sir.
Mandatory, you have the course.
No,
How will I make it
department.
mandatory for MD?
Mandated department.
No, department. I agree with you, but the point is, where is it demand? Because in the government, we are trying to change that though. There is no position in district hospital or a CSC where we say family medicine MD is essential. That we will change. I'm working on that as part of the government. But in the private sector, nobody is missing MD family medicine. Why? Because if they were missing, private medical colleges would have been running these courses. It is demand issue. it's a paradoxical situation that there is no demand for post-graduation in family medicine today. The government part we will set right. Maybe in this year I'll sort it out.
Yes.
But the private sector, nobody is missing the family medicine. Somebody has to showcase it. So those of you who are in the space of family medicine, can you work with me as Neeti to
Yes, sir.
develop a great post-MD family medicine program, which is aspirational? One of the problems in that is, how do you train MD family medicine? Person will go to 3 months in pediatrics, 4 months here, 1 month in obstetrics. When you do that, they don't belong to anybody.
No,
Because
Dr. Paul,
there are practical difficulties. We'll be happy to work on MD family medicine program.
Dr.
Thank you.
Paul, this Sagar calling. Actually, that concept of family medicine may be very well used at a primary, what you call our centers, the primary health centers, and even at the district hospitals, where majority of the people come. You don't need a specialist to start with. And MBBS may not have enough of a experience, whereas a family medicine person would have a lot more wide experience in managing many of the cases that come to district level hospital. One of the things that the Western world has gone through, especially America, producing too many postgraduate specialties, we have later on found that we need more general practitioners than specialists. Therefore, I want you to keep in balance when you are planning all these things, that we have to keep more of a general practitioners or a family practitioners who are readily available for the common ailments, and there should be proportionately developed specialists. One other question I have is one major question comes is, with all your changes in the medical college curriculum, how well these new graduates or graduates who undergo the new curriculum will be accepted when they want to go abroad, like especially UK, Europe, America, or Australia, where they want either for a job or for advanced degrees. Will they be equally recognized?
Well, to the first part, sir, I truly appreciate your point, and I believe that family medicine training should be, manifold. We need to crack it. And I only said that some difficulties about demand side are not there. And if they become, then people will go for it. And I respect that. And kindly help us. I invite API to help us develop an aspirational, functional MD family medicine program, because MBBS by itself is not enough. GPs in UK take another 4 or 5 years to maintain. So we have actually not cracked the real model. If I put it like this, we'll work for it. But your second point is about them going abroad for further degrees. They will be accepted because actually their quality will be so much more. They have to pass the respective exams in those countries. They'll be more apt at it, because I think we are enriching training by all these means. But I don't want any of them to go abroad, sir, anymore. They should not only go for training and come back to India. They have no business to be there. Please send 20,000 doctors back. Help us to build our our capacity. Thank you.
If you produce enough training places, I would not have come here.
Sir, those who stayed also served. You served in your own way. I don't want to get into that debate, but you look at pathetic situations, sir, in India. But we want to change it.
Excellent job. You are doing wonderful.
Sir, there
God
are
bless you.
65 million surgeries to be done. We are able to do only 25. I can go on and on. And I think
please, please convey to Honorable Prime Minister Modi that members of API who come here, it is a saying, you can take a person out of the village, but village doesn't go out. So we are constantly thinking about India, and we are always looking to how to help India. You know that very well at a personal level, but I can say most of our API members are interested in that one.
So on this, I want to have a final word. I want us to provide opportunities for training, for advanced training and specialties over and above the degrees where like Dr. Sagar trained me. I came back and did better things for neonatology. Those opportunities you should open by thousands and find a way of doing it. It's needed in cancer, needed in GE, needed in urology. That is one big thing you can do and you can change. You, Dr. Sagar, changed my life, my trajectory. So those are out there. Train them, send back. Those people who run labs, make us do better labs for microbiology, virology, and everything. That's one. The second part is, sir, some of you can become a consortium and run great medical colleges. I think now the environment is corruption free. That era of difficult rules and regulations is not there. I urge you to set up medical colleges. I urge you to become part of the National Board of Examination training programs in private hospital where you have a comfort zone, working with them, hone them. For them, I'll take just half a minute, Dr. Sudhakar. Let's say again Gangaram Hospital, because that's the only name private hospital I come. So there is a training program, let's say in endocrinology. Now their own teachers who are consultants may not be great, they'll be good enough, but not great. You help them. You do tele-education sitting from there, and you have an arrangement with that hospital to train the student. And then today, they are not only going to be at that hospital. You have a cohort of NBE students in GI surgery for the entire country. Nurture them. So you create these pathways. We can talk more about this for taking it forward. But I'm most grateful to you. I'm honored to be amongst you. You have served the world, the society, and the nation with great contribution. Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your interactive, great interactive session. So at this point, I request Dr. Jonalagada to give the recognition plaque to Professor Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Moon. Dr. Paul, I have one final question. I think I have a right to ask the president. Okay, so the government allow the private sector to develop medical schools. Am I heard right?
Of course, yes, sir.
Okay, I thought it is only government sector that they develop, not private sector.
No, not just private, one entity, but you can be more than one entity. That you are Tata, you run a hospital. You are Manipal, you can make a medical college. And I am L&T, I make buildings for residents. And three of us can join together and make the best world-class hospital medical college. And today, you don't have to locate it outskirts where nobody will go. And these emerging rules will make it possible for a better location, better usable hospital.
Okay, thank you very much. Vijay, can you cite the plaque, please?
Dr. Jonalagada, okay.
Yes, sir.
I have one last
question. Thank you so much. I'm honored, sir.
Before, you want to have a question before I read this plaque?
Just one question I have to. Okay. Are there? Somebody tell there. What is? Okay, good. Just 1 second. Vinod, Madam wants to ask one question.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning, good evening.
Fantastic presentation. My question to you is, since you are developing so many medical colleges and also the physicians, once they finish their training, once they go into practice, do you intend to initiate any of the continuous medical education for those people who already graduated from medical schools? And also you are planning on developing some kind of a relicensing those practitioners who are practicing?
Ma'am, the short answer is yes to both. The National Medical Commission has laid a high priority on relicensing, and it is on their agenda. And the chairperson, Dr. Sharma, is committed to that, and he made public announcement. And second, even now CMEs are required, but I'm sure NMC will take it forward even more, and I'll carry this message and give this message to NMC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Valid.
Vijay, can you put the plaque, please?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. As the president of American Association of Physicians Indian Origin, recognize Vinod K. Paul, MD, for his outstanding contribution to the medical education in India, and welcome him as a member of RP Distinguished Speakers Club Sudhakar John Lagarde, President, Vemuri S. Murthy, MD, Chairman, October 28, 2020, Oak Brook, Illinois. Thank you very much, sir, for outstanding presentation, and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.